Hello, and greetings, lovely person. With the exception of 4th edition, in this video I will be looking at the mechanics of Turn Undead for D&D 1st, 2nd, 3.5, and 5th editions. Since I will be going into quite a bit of detail, as well as giving examples, this video will be long, and probably is more appropriate for those who are new to Dungeons & Dragons. In order not to make this video too long, I will not be going over the mechanics of evil clerics attempting to gain control of undead creatures. Low-level demons, devils, and fiends are also turnable at high levels, but I also will not be going over these. If there is sufficient interest, I may do a separate video on them. As a summary, displayed is a table that shows the differences between the editions. This table will make more sense after I have discussed each version. I will start with 5th edition and then work backwards towards 1st edition. If you want to skip to a certain edition, timestamps are provided in the description section below. In all versions of D&D, the typical undead monsters include the dark magic animated skeletons, the corpse-walking zombies, the cadaver-devouring ghouls, the stealthy shadows, the hateful and evil wights, ghasts, who are indistinguishable from ghouls, the incorporeal, malicious, incarnate wraths, the rot-infested mummies. Are you my mummy? The poltergeist-like specters, the Dracula wannabe vampires, the incorporeal haunting ghosts, and the fearsome and ever so powerful lich. In my examples, I will be using 2 clerics of different levels, wisdom and charisma scores. Let's say hello to Priest Johann, a 6th level cleric with a wisdom score of 16 and a charisma score of 12. Let's also say hello to Priestess Krista, a 12th level cleric with a wisdom score of 12 and a charisma score of 15. In all editions of Dungeons & Dragons, wisdom is the most important ability score for clerics. Please ignore Krista's bland wisdom score. I only did this to illustrate how differing ability scores can make a difference. The charisma ability score only comes into play in the 3.5 edition of D&D. So, let's start with 5th edition. In the other editions of D&D, it is the cleric that needs to roll a d20 to see how successful they are at their turning attempt. In 5th edition, it is the undead that need to make a wisdom saving throw versus the cleric's turning attempt. The DC, or difficulty challenge, of a save versus turn is determined by the cleric's level and wisdom score. The turn save DC is equal to 8 plus the cleric's proficiency bonus, which depends on the cleric's level, plus the cleric's wisdom modifier. Turn Undead is a subcategory of the Channel Divinity Cleric feature. Unlike other editions, in 5th edition, clerics cannot turn undead until they reach 2nd level. As an action, a cleric can attempt to turn undead. Each undead that the cleric can see or hear within a 30-foot radius must make a wisdom saving throw. If it fails, then the undead creature is turned and will try to move as far away as possible from the cleric for 1 minute, which is equivalent to 10 rounds, or until it takes any damage. Between the levels of 2 to 5, Turn Undead can only be attempted once in between rests, whether it be a long rest or a short rest. Between levels 6 to 17, Turn Undead can only be attempted twice in between rests. Levels 18 and above, Turn Undead can only be attempted thrice in between rests. Starting at 5th level, a cleric can instantly destroy an undead creature if it fails its saving throw and its challenge rating is at or below a certain threshold of the cleric's level. Unlike other additions, certain undead, such as vampires and liches, cannot be instantly destroyed. Paladins can also turn undead, but their mechanics depends on what domain the paladin is in, which I will not be going over in this video. Again, I could do it as a separate video if there is sufficient interest. For our example, let's start with our 6th level cleric, Priest Johann. Because of reaching 6th level, Johann proficiency bonus is a +3. Due to having a 16 wisdom score, Johann's wisdom modifier is another +3. Thus, the Turn Undead save DC equals 14. Okay, a skeleton enters the room, followed by 4 of his friends. At this point, let's say Johann attempts to turn undead. Since 4 skeletons are within 30 feet of Johann, they will have to make a wisdom saving throw to resist being turned. Since a skeleton's wisdom is 8, they will roll saving throws each at a -1 penalty. Due to being 6th level, Johann can destroy undead creatures whose challenge rating is a half or below. Since a skeleton's CR is a quarter, those who fail their save versus turn roll will be destroyed. Due to one skeleton being further than 30 feet away from Johann, that skeleton will be unaffected. Okay, let's mix things up. Into the room enters 1 vampire, 1 wight, and 1 specter. If that was not bad enough, a horde of zombies also enter into the room. Johann panics and attempts to turn undead. With the exception of 4 zombies that are further than 30 feet away from Johann, the rest of the undead creatures must make wisdom saving throws at a DC of 14 or be turned. Since the zombies have a DC below a half, those that fail their saving throws will be destroyed. Now, let's have Johann encounter the Lich, Asarak. Upon seeing Asarak, Johann says, "Are you kidding me?" Then he turns around and flees. Assuming Johann has not rested after the previous 2 undead encounters, he would not have been able to try to turn Asarak anyway. I will do one example with the 12th level cleric, Priestess Krista, and that will be of the mixed undead group encounter. Due to her level and her wisdom score, Krista's turn save DC is 13. As before, into the room enters 1 vampire, 1 wight, and 1 specter. And a horde of zombies also enter into the room. Krista would like to push through the horde of zombies in order to get all the undead within a 30-foot radius from her. But that would provoke opportunities of attack. So, she decides to attempt to turn undead from where she is now. As before, with the exception of the 4 zombies, The rest of the undead creatures must make wisdom saving throws at a DC of 13 or be turned. Since the specter and the zombies have CRs below 2, those that fail their saving throws will be destroyed. Okay, let's move on to the 3.5 edition of D&D. In this edition, Turn Undead is a supernatural ability that a cleric can perform as a standard action. It probably has the most complicated rules for turning undead. A cleric can attempt to turn undead a number of times per day equal to 3 plus their charisma modifier. This number can be increased by 4 by taking the extra turning feat. The range of a Turn Undead attempt is a 60-foot line of sight from the cleric. So, any undead obscured by a wall or partition will be unaffected. The closest turnable undead will be affected first. The first thing the player playing the cleric needs to do is roll a turning check, which is a charisma check. Depending on the roll and the undead's hit dice, the displayed turning undead table shows how powerful of an undead creature the cleric can turn. Even for a mixed group of undead, this roll is only done once. If this table is confusing, perhaps the displayed matrix will make more sense. The rows represent the hit dice of the undead creature, and the columns represent the level of the cleric. The number of undead turned depends on their hit dice when compared to a 2d6 roll plus the cleric's level plus their charisma modifier. The closest turnable undead will be affected first. Successfully turned undead will flee as far away as possible from the cleric for 10 rounds. The turning effect remains in play for the duration as long as the cleric stays at least 10 feet away from the turned creature. Others can attack the creature and the turning effect will not be broken. If the cleric has at least twice as many levels as the undead creature's hit dice, then that creature is destroyed instead of being turned. Beginning at 4th level, paladins can also turn undead, but at 3 levels lower than their current level. Okay, let's put our guinea pig, the 6th level priest, Johann, back into the room. Johann, what's the matter? Why are you not boldly striding into the middle of the room like you did before? Oh well. As before, let's have 5 skeletons invade the room. As FYI, skeletons are 1 hit dice creatures. Since all the skeletons are within 60 feet from Johann's line of sight, he can potentially turn them all. Actually, he can potentially destroy them all since his level is more than twice that of the skeleton's hit dice. Due to his 12 charisma score, Johann normally gets a +1 to his turning check. However, due to being 6th level, he would need to roll a 0 for a success. In other words, no need to roll. The next step is to determine the amount of undead hit dice that he can affect. Unless Johann is on unholy ground, even if Johann rolled snake eyes on his 2d6 roll, the minimum total undead hit dice he can turn is 9. So all 5 skeletons in this example are destroyed. Now that he left a pile of bones, the commotion has attracted the attention of others in the dungeon. Into the room enters one vampire, one wight, one specter, and a horde of zombies. Johann again panics and attempts to turn undead. Johann is also feeling a sense of déjà vu. Johann's player now rolls once for his turning check roll. To turn the vampire, Johann needs to roll 16 or better. With his +1 charisma modifier, the roll needed drops to 15. To turn the specter, Johann needs to roll 13 or better. Again, with his +1 charisma modifier, the roll needed drops to 12. To turn the wight, he needs to roll 4 or better. Again, with his +1 charisma modifier, the roll needed drops to 3. To turn the zombies, Johann needs to roll 0 or better. For this example, let's assume Johann rolled a 14, which is good enough to turn all the undead creatures in the room except for the vampire. Next, we need to determine the total undead hit dice that can be turned. D&D 3.5 calls this turning damage. Let's assume Johann is lucky and rolls double sixes. When you add his level and +1 charisma modifier, that brings the total hit dice of undead that he can turn to 19. The wight is the closest turnable undead, hence it will be affected first. It will turn around and flee. The fleeing wight has 4 hit dice, lowering our turning damage pool to 15. The next closest undead is the vampire. However, Johann was unable to turn it, so we will skip over it. Following the vampire, the specter is the next closest undead. Likewise, it will move as far away as possible from the cleric. The fleeing specter has 7 hit dice, lowering our turning damage pool down to 8. Johann's cleric level is more than twice that of the zombie's hit dice, which means any turned zombie will be destroyed instead. Unfortunately, our turning damage pool of 8 is not enough to destroy all 12 zombies. However, it is enough to destroy 4 of the zombies, leaving 8 unaffected. Let's imagine the same scenario, but with the priestess Krista, our 12th level cleric, with a 15 charisma score, which gives her a +2 modifier. As before, into the dungeon room enters one vampire, one wight, one specter, and a horde of zombies also enters into the room. Krista is also feeling a sense of déjà vu. She soon shakes off that feeling and attempts to turn undead. Krista's player now rolls once for her turning check roll. Without even including her charisma modifier, Krista will need to roll a 0 for all the types of undead in this room, mainly because of her high level when compared to the creature's hit dice. Let's take the vampire as an example. Its hit dice is 8. That is -4 lower than Krista's cleric level of 12. Next, we need to determine the total undead hit dice that can be turned, aka the turning damage. On a 2d6, let's assume Krista rolls 7. When you add in her level and +2 charisma modifier, that brings the total hit dice of undead she can turn to 21. The white is the closest turnable undead, hence it will be affected first. The white's hit dice is 4, which is less than half of Krista's cleric level. So it is destroyed. The destroyed white lowers our turning damage pool by 4, its hit dice, to 17. The next closest undead is the vampire. Half of Krista's cleric level of 12 is 6. 6 is less than the vampire's hit dice of 8. So it is not destroyed. Instead, it is turned. So it turns around and flees for 10 rounds. The fleeing vampire's hit dice lowers our turning damage pool to 9. Following the vampire, the next closest undead is the specter. The specter's hit dice is 7. In order to destroy the specter in a turning attempt, a cleric's level must be at least twice that number. Unfortunately, Krista's cleric level is below that threshold. So, instead, like the vampire, it also will move as far away as possible from Priestess Krista for 10 rounds. The fleeing specter's hit dice now lowers our turning damage pool down to 2. That is enough to destroy only one zombie, leaving the remaining 11 unaffected. In 2nd edition D&D, the rules for Turn Undead for clerics are in both the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. The Turn Undead mechanics in 2nd edition D&D is a tweaked version of D&D's 1st edition. Attempting to turn undead counts as an action and takes 1 round. Turned undead creatures will move as far away as possible from the cleric until they are out of sight of the cleric. As long as the cleric stays at least 10 feet away from the turned creature, the turning effect remains in place. The duration of the turning effect is not clearly specified in either the Player's Handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide. However, here is my interpretation of a sentence segment in both books. The cleric needs to continue to maintain their turning. So, if the cleric casts a spell or makes an attack on the next round, then the turning effect ends. Again, this is only my interpretation. Likewise, the range of the turning attempt is not specified. I assume it is the same as D&D 1st edition, which is all undead creatures that are within visual range of the cleric. In 2nd edition D&D, there is no limit to the number of times per day a cleric can attempt to turn undead. However, only 1 attempt can be made per cleric per encounter. For their turning attempt against the undead, the cleric rolls a 20-sided die. The displayed table is used to resolve the turning attempt. The rows are sorted from lowest to highest by both undead type and hit dice. The columns are sorted by cleric level. For an encounter, only 1 roll is made, which is applicable to each undead creature in the encounter. Assuming the turning attempt is successful, next the cleric needs to roll 2 6-sided dice to determine how many undead are affected. The lowest hit dice undead creatures are turned first. As seen before, this is different to how 3.5 and 5th edition works. If the cleric is high enough level and the undead creatures are low enough level, then an additional 2 to 8 of these low-level undead creatures can be turned. This footnote of a rule will probably cause quite a bit of confusion. My simple solution would be that starting at 8th level, the cleric can turn an additional 1d4 undead creatures. Paladins can turn undead at 2 levels lower than their current level. Okay, let's see how our 6th level cleric, Priest Johann, handles the undead under 2nd edition rules. For simplicity's sake, I am going to assume Johann can see all the undead creatures that are in the dungeon room. As before, 5 skeletons step into the room. Because Johann is 6th level, he can auto-destroy skeletons, so no turning attempt roll will be needed. However, he does need to roll 2 6-sided dice to determine how many skeletons are destroyed. Hence, there is a chance he will not be able to destroy all 5 skeletons at once in this encounter via Turn Undead attempt. Okay, time to do the mixed undead group example. Into the room enters 1 vampire, 1 wight, and 1 specter. A horde of zombies also enters into the room. Johann pulls out his holy symbol, starts chanting, and attempts to turn undead. Displayed on the screen is what Johann needs to roll to turn each of these undead. The vampire will be the toughest, since a roll of 20 is required. Because his level is high enough, instead of turning, Johann can auto-destroy these zombies. For illustration purposes, let us assume Johann rolls a natural 20. Crit, crit, crit! Next, we need to determine the total number of undead turned by rolling 2 6-sided dice. Since there are a total of 11 undead creatures in the room, Johann needs to roll an 11 or better to turn the vampire, specter, and wight, and to destroy all 8 zombies. Let's assume he rolled a 9. Going from the lowest hit dice monsters to the highest, that is enough to destroy all 8 zombies and to turn the wight. However, that still leaves the specter and the vampire to deal with. Okay, now it is Priestess Krista, our 12th level cleric, turn to deal with the undead horde. Into the dungeon room enters 1 vampire, 1 wight, 1 specter, and a horde of zombies. Displayed on the screen is what Krista needs to roll to turn each of these undead. The highest number required for potentially turning all undead in this room is the vampires, which is 7. Because she is at a high enough level, she can potentially destroy all the zombies plus the wight. Let us assume she rolls a 10, which is good enough to even turn the vampire. Next, she needs to roll 2 6-sided dice to determine the total number of undead turned. However, in this case, the zombies are acting as the proverbial bullet sponges for the vampire and the specter. Let us assume she rolls an 11. Hence, 11 of the 12 zombies are destroyed. But wait, because Priestess Krista is high enough level of a cleric, that annoying footnotes rule comes into play. She can turn, not destroy, turn an additional 2d4 low hit dice undead monsters. In my interpretation, that is enough to turn both the remaining zombie and the wights, leaving behind the specter and vampire. Because 1st edition D&D, also known as AD&D, is so similar to 2nd edition D&D, I am going to sound like a broken record when explaining the Turn Undead mechanics for it. Sorry about this, but this is done for people who are skipping the 2nd edition portion of this video. Rules for Turn Undead for clerics are in both the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. As in all other editions of D&D, attempting to turn undead counts as an action. No other action, such as spellcasting or attacking with a weapon, can be taken during that melee/combat round. 1st edition D&D does not put a limit on the number of turning attempts that can be done per day. However, I read enough AD&D modules to know that a turning attempt for each undead type can only be done once per combat encounter per cleric. Turned undead creatures will move as far away as possible from the cleric for 3 to 12 rounds. As far as range, the cleric can attempt to turn undead creatures that are within the cleric's visual range. So, if a cleric is blinded or within a sphere of darkness, that cleric will not be able to attempt to turn undead. As the Player's Handbook writes, as a rule of thumb, a cleric is effective against any undead monster whose hit dice are not greater than those of the cleric. Unlike other editions of D&D, in 1st edition D&D, the cleric can target which undead types to attempt to turn. The display table is used to resolve the turning attempt. The rows are sorted by undead type. The columns are sorted by cleric level. If a mixed group of undead are encountered, then the cleric must make a separate d20 roll for each undead type. The cleric may choose to target all the undead types in the cleric's current melee round, or the cleric may choose to target only 1 or 2 undead types in the current melee round, and choose to target the rest in the cleric's next melee round. If the attempt or attempts within the current melee round are successful, then a total of 1 to 12 undead creatures are turned and or destroyed if the cleric is high enough level to do so. The lowest hit dice undead are turned first. This table also has some footnote rules which are only applicable at higher levels. Paladins can turn undead at 2 levels lower than their current level. Okay, let's say hello again to our 6th level cleric, Priest Johann. For simplicity's sake, I am going to assume the cleric can see all the undead creatures that will be in the dungeon room. In comes 5 skeletons into the room. Because Johann is 6th level, he can auto-destroy skeletons. So, no turning attempt roll will be needed. However, he does need to roll one 12-sided die to determine how many skeletons are destroyed. Hence, there is a chance he will not be able to destroy all 5 skeletons at once in this encounter via Turn Undead attempt. So, is Priest Johann foolish enough to stay in the room? is Priest Johann ready to face what comes next? Before he can change his mind, into the room enters one vampire, one wight, one ghast, and a horde of zombies. Ghasts are indistinguishable from ghouls. So, Johann thinks it is a ghoul, and at 6th level, clerics can auto-turn ghouls. The next thing Johann's player needs to do is specify to the Dungeon Master which undead Johann is targeting for turning. Since there are more than 12 undead in the room, Johann knows that he cannot turn them all at once. So, he decides to turn the vampire, wight, and the so-called ghoul, thinking he will only need to roll 2 20-sided dice instead of 3. The Dungeon Master tells him to roll 3 20-sided dice. This alone gives away the surprise that the ghoul is not really a ghoul. Displayed on the screen is what Priest Johann needs to roll to turn each of these undead. Johann needs to roll a highly unlikely 20 to turn the vampire. Let's assume he doesn't. For the ghast, he needs to roll a relatively easy 7 or above to turn it. Let's assume he does. For the wights, Johann needs to roll a 4 or above to turn it. Again, let's assume he does. Next, Johann needs to determine the total number of undead turned by rolling one 12-sided die. If Johann unluckily rolls a 1, then the wight would be turned, leaving the ghast unaffected. Let's assume Johann rolls a 2 or above, which is enough to cause the wight and the ghast to flee. The next thing to do is determine how long the turning effect will last by rolling a 10-sided die and adding 2 to the result. During the monster's melee rounds, let us assume Priest Johann managed to survive. He can now target the zombies and attempt to turn them. But he cannot also target the vampire, since he already done so in this combat encounter. However, Johann does not like his odds against the vampire. So, he turns around and flees for his life. How will Priestess Krista, our 12th level cleric, fare against the undead horde using 1st edition rules? Let's find out. Into the dungeon room enters one wight, one vampire, one specter, and a horde of zombies. Displayed on the screen is what Krista needs to roll to turn each of these undead. Because she is at a high enough level, she can potentially destroy all these zombies plus the wight. Next, Krista needs to decide which undead to target for her turning attempt. On her melee round, she decides not to target the zombies and focus on the vampire, the specter, and the wight. She makes a separate d20 roll for each of the undead type she targets. Let's assume she rolled high enough to turn the vampire and the specter. She does not need to roll for the wight, but the Dungeon Master could make her do so anyway, in case the Dungeon Master is the type who enjoys messing around with their players' heads. Next, Krista needs to determine the total number of undead turned. She would need to roll a 3 or better on a 12-sided die to turn all the undead creatures she targeted. For this example, let's say she does so. Hence, the vampire and the specter flee for 3 to 12 rounds. At 6th level, clerics can auto-destroy wights. So, Krista has wiped the wight out of existence. All that remains are the 12 zombies, who lurch forward and attack our priestess. On her next melee round, Priestess Krista can now target these zombies for turning, which she does. Since she is a 12th level cleric, she can auto-destroy them. All she needs to do now is roll for how many zombies are destroyed. However, because she is a 12th level cleric, another annoying footnote rule comes into play for low-level undead. Normally, she would roll one 12-sided die. Instead, against the zombies, she would roll one 6-sided die and add 6 to the result. In other words, she can destroy 7 to 12 zombies instead of 1 to 12. Let us assume she rolls a 4 on a 6-sided die. 4 plus 6 equals 10. So 10 zombies are disintegrated, leaving behind 2 zombies who are unaffected. As you can see, there are differences between the various editions of Dungeons & Dragons when it comes to the cleric's talent for turning undead. Before 5th edition, players rolled a d20 for their turning attempts. In 5th edition, the undead roll wisdom saving throws to resist being turned. 2nd edition is a tweaked version of 1st edition's mechanics. Both do not specify the range for a turning attempt, whereas it does get specified with specific numbers for such range in 3.5 and 5th editions. Both 3.5 and 5th editions also place limits on how many times per day a turning attempt can be made. Edition 3.5 probably has the most complex rules for Turn Undead. Sorry for not covering 4th edition. I never played 4th edition, and this video is getting too long anyway. Thank you for watching. Hope this video has been informative and entertaining. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment. I do like feedback. Till next time, this is RPGmodsFan saying cheers, have a good day, and goodbye.
Still love you